Tamás Barácz. I work for Danube Institute, and my guest today is a Hungarian politician. Actually, he's an American expert recently, but he took a government job, Deputy State Secretary at the Office of the Prime Minister Political Director, Márton Ugrósdy. Márton, thank you very much for being here. There will be a meeting between Viktor Orbán and Donald Trump in these days, actually 7th of November. Everybody expecting a huge announcements. You know probably some details because you are in the politics in the Prime Minister office, and I would ask whether it's mainly for energy policy or Ukraine policy, politics, Hungarian-American relations. What would be the emphasis on?
Well, the Prime Minister outlined the main priorities last week in his weekly radio address, claiming that this will be a great overhaul of the bilateral relationship altogether. Obviously, the most important part of this is energy cooperation, at least for two reasons. The first reason is obviously how the United States is trying to position itself within Europe and what it means to European energy security in general, especially with the recent announcement on American sanctions and some kind of secondary sanctions on Russian energy companies, which have a significant impact on Europe. And the other is, of course, the bilateral relationship itself, which had its ups and downs in the last 35 years since we became independent once again. And now we might be entering a new golden age of bilateral relationships, mostly because the political layer of the relationship has changed significantly since the Biden administration. What we saw before was some kind of an ideological, I wouldn't say rivalry because the size of the two countries are so immensely different, but a fundamental ideological disagreement on where we're headed, both as the West, also as industrial societies, and also as political communities at the end of the day. And this kind of difference was very visible with the activities of the last American ambassador to Budapest, who occasionally became something like the spokesperson of the Hungarian opposition too. This certainly did not help the bilateral relationship because this is not the job of ambassadors. The job of ambassadors is to work on the bilateral relationship, advance the interests of the countries that they're representing, and also to have a civilized relationship with the country they're posted to. I dare to say that the previous US ambassador did not really fulfill this goal successfully. And this was also very visible when the ambassador went home as the term of the Biden administration has ended, and the new chargé d'affaires took over the US embassy here, who's not an ambassador. Obviously, his diplomatic rank is different, but he has changed the attitude. He became more conversational, if I can put it that way.
Friendly relationship, I would say.
It's a friendly relationship, of course, and just in a very short time frame of 6-7 months, we reached a point where it's not going to be a White House visit by the Hungarian Prime Minister, but substantial documents on tangible cooperation will be signed as well. And one may very well ask the question that if we have so many common interests, if there's so much economic interest in facilitating and making these ties more closer, why you want to kill that with the political disagreements that we will always have with foreign countries just because of the fact that they're foreign countries and not Hungary, and the job of the Hungarian government is to represent the Hungarian people and work in the interests of the Hungarian people.
Yeah, so it's a friendly relationship. One topic is interesting between the friendly governments, between you and the Trump administration, is energy policy. And it's connected to security issues like the Ukrainian war, because US wants its allies to stop buying Russian energy, stop financing the war machine of Russia, right? And this is a request to yourself too. And my question is there any chance that Prime Minister Viktor Orbán can have an influence or a lobbying power to get this opt-out for Hungary under these sanctions against Russia?
Mm-hmm. We don't know what the future holds, first of all. But what we saw is that the sanctions were announced, I think, about last week or 2 weeks ago. I'm not certain about the dates. And immediately, 3 German refineries were exempted from the sanctions, which constitute around 12 to 15% of German refining capacity. So it's not completely unusual to get waivers from these kind of sanctions. Obviously, this might be the subject of the talks between the two governments, but Obviously, I cannot promise anything on that account because it's really up to the line ministries to make an agreement on that. And a political decision at the end is also needed. What we also saw before with the case of the Serbian oil company is that they have been also listed by the US Department of Treasury, but they got their waivers extended over and over again until it expired at the end of last month, which is also putting our Croatian friends in a bit of a trouble economically because of the transit contracts they have signed with the Serbs. But these are contracts, so lots of things are possible. So let's see what the future holds. We do understand that the Americans are having a security dimension to this. For us, this is also a security issue, but from the other way around. And the other way around is that the Hungarian government has to ensure that this country is powered up, that we have electricity, we have heating, we have gas in the gas stations, and so on and so forth. And talking about diversifying energy supplies is great, but we need these kind of solutions, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, but right now. And in order to fulfill many of the ideas that have been floating around for years, you still have to build infrastructure, you still have to build the ships, you still have to build the overland pipelines, and so on and so forth. And these don't come out of nowhere. And we've been doing quite a lot of work in diversifying our energy supplies. In natural gas, we're linked up to all the neighboring countries. And of course, we realized back in 2006 and 2009, when the first and second Ukraine-Russia gas wars have been happening, that you cannot rely on one single source and transit route of supply because that puts you at risk. So we started to diversify. We worked together with Serbia, we worked together with Croatia, with Slovakia, Romania, Slovenia, and Austria as well, in order to have multiple options should something happen to the Ukrainian stretch of the pipeline, which actually did happen later on. And that put us in a much easier position when it comes to replacing those volumes which have gone missing because of certain reasons. That certain reason obviously being the war in Ukraine as we speak. Yeah,
we know that because we follow the declarations of, for example, Peter Szijjártó, the foreign minister, always repeating that phrase that the energy policy is a physical thing, not an ideological one. We understand that. I personally understand that if there's a pipeline, we cannot do anything. That there's Druzhba pipeline and other pipeline, and Hungary is not, it's a landlocked country, so it's a different situation than Croatia and Poland, for example. But your critics always say that you had 3 years' time during the Russian war to start the diversification, and some critics just criticize you that the pace of the diversification is very slow. And now the American pressure is growing, so there will be a quicker pace of diversification? Can we expect that? Mm-hmm.
Well, we've been diversifying in natural gas for more than 15 years now, so I don't really understand this kind of criticism that, why we haven't done anything. Well, we've done quite a lot of things linking up to neighboring countries in natural gas. Oil is, of course, different because there's different ways to transport it. And I also have to underline that right now, it's not forbidden to trade with Russia in energy. So if you look at the EU regulations, if you look at the 19 iterations of the sanctions regime, it's legally possible. So there's nothing illegal as we speak if you trade with Russia in oil and gas. Of course, there are certain requirements, there are certain rules you have to follow, there's a price cap and a bunch of other things, but it's not illegal. If certain people have a political point of view on whether this is good or bad, that's their problem. Our problem is that how we're going to get the energy the country needs and how we're going to get that at an affordable price.
There is a technical part of this problem and a political one. Let's just do the technical part first. In these, some sources like the Hungarian media outlet Index wrote an article just 2 days ago before this meeting in the White House, and they know from government sources, they cite government sources, that there would be a deal maybe in the White House on the American nuclear technology export to Hungary and some LNG project. Can you strengthen this argument? It will be a real issue, like America will help Hungary diversifying, or maybe?
Obviously, I'm not able to share the details on that. What I can share is that we had a very long conversation with our friends and allies on these topics for a very long time. The bottom line is always the business case. So it's great to talk about small modular reactors, for example, but nobody has seen any of these operating yet. Of course, if they will be around, if they're going to be sustainable, if they're going to be safe, and if the regulations are going to be in place, and they are going to produce electricity at a competitive price, we're more than happy to look at it. So I think the logic is somewhat different when it comes to the government, because the main driving force for us is that what serves the interests of the Hungarian people and what serves the interests of the Hungarian economy. And we're going to pursue these goals no matter what, because we are responsible to the Hungarian people. We're happy to work with our friends, we're happy to work with our allies, but we're not going to do deals with them just for the sake of doing business with them. We're going to do business with them if it's mutually beneficial for both of us. And if these conditions are met, if the financing is there, if the technology is available, if the entire project is affordable, we're more than happy to go ahead and do new projects and do investment and buy American SMRs if there's a chance for that. But at the end of the day, it's the math which is the most important, whether the numbers add up or they don't.
So you are open to buy American LNG, you are open to American nuclear technology as well, not only Russia?
Well, we're open to everything and everybody, depending that the price is right and it's sustainable and it's a safe technology. I mean, if you look at the travels of the Prime Minister in the last few years, you see that he's been to Azerbaijan talking about natural gas, he's been to Qatar multiple times talking about LNG, but it all comes down to whether there are any gas available, whether the shipping options are there, whether it's affordable, whether you have a regasification terminal nearby, which is not really expensive, and also the volumes are right. And there are so many technical questions along the way, and you have to clear all of them before you can proceed. So political will is important. I certainly no doubt about it, especially in the Middle East and around the Caspian, but the numbers have to come together as well.
I see. Thank you for answering that. And let's talk about the political part of this same issue, which is the sanction politics, maybe. As I mentioned, the US and even the Brussels, the European Union, tries to ask you and Slovakia to stop buying Russian energy because they want to force Russia into the negotiations on the peace agreement, and they want to cut the supplies of the war machinery of Russia, of course. This is it's a logical thing, and Trump, administration Trump is doing in these days the same, sanctioning Russian energy companies. Do the sanctions work or not? Because your government for 3 years always saying that these kind of sanctions, political motivation, it doesn't work. But the Trump administration follows the other line, the sanction politics. So which is the right way to force Russia?
There's a fundamental difference between the American and the European approach in a way that the United States wants to end the war in Ukraine, whereas the European Union wants this war to continue as long as it takes. Let me put it that way. And because of that, I believe the Trump administration's approach to sanctions is also different, because they use it as rather as a signaling than a virtue signaling, what you see in the case of the European Union. My impression is that the European Union is sanctioning Russia for the sake of sanctioning Russia, so they would be able to show that they're on the right side of history without any tangible result. What we see is that Russia is still fighting the war. It's still able to produce all the weapons and machinery it needs to strike Ukraine every night. They're still advancing on the battlefield, and their economy has been doing not well, but let's say fine in the last couple of years. So if you look at the GDP numbers of Russia for the last 3.5 years since the war has been ongoing, you see that they haven't collapsed.
Yeah. And there is a limit of the...
Yeah, but we're always being promised that Russia is going to collapse next year, and next year comes and Russia is still here. So let me just not believe that argument, which is not against you, but against the general narrative. On the other hand, I think it's also a gross overstatement that Russia is able to finance this war because of what Slovakia and Hungary pays for oil and gas. Most of Russian energy exports go outside of Europe. And basically, this is the fundamental problem with the sanctions regime as well. It's really hard to sanction a country if 80% of the world economy is not participating in your sanctions regime. And even that, as the case of Cuba or North Korea shows, you can still stay alive. And you can still have your weapons development program, you can still survive domestically, and you can also be a significant player in world politics, just as we see it in the case of North Korea, which has been sealed off from the world for the last 70 years, But they were able to build their nuclear weapon, and they are pretty good at crypto scams, for example. So they're able to finance their regime at the end of the day. And to be very honest, most of the trade Russia has been doing in the field of energy has been with Turkey, as they say these days, India, China, and a bunch of other countries. And, Russian oil actually has reached Europe through Indian intermediaries. So we're not only paying the Russians, but we're also paying the Indian middleman to be able to say that we're not buying anything from Russia. The oil is the same, the quality is the same, but at least certain European leaders can claim to be on the right side of history. And, there's a very good Hungarian proverb on this, that what you do at the edge of the well and what you do in the well, but the end result is the same.
I see. Ukraine politics. Hungary has a different alternative Ukraine politics than the mainstream European countries. And is it a problem in the bilateral American-Hungarian relations? Because I had a guest like 1 month ago called Robert Wilkie, a former Veteran Affairs Minister for Trump. And he told us that the Trump administration will not let Ukraine fall or fail in this war. Definitely Trump will side with Ukraine against Russia. And your politics are a little bit different. Is it a problem between you?
If you think about the war in Ukraine as a black and white issue, which has been the predominant narrative for the last 3.5 years, then Secretary Wilkie might be right. But I don't really believe the narrative, to be honest. And you can stand with Ukraine and end the war at the same time. Because once the war ends, Ukraine will be still here, and they will have to survive. They will have to have an economy, they will need reconstruction, they will have to maintain their armed forces, maybe at a much smaller scale than they have right now once the active stage of the fighting stops. So standing with Ukraine doesn't mean that you have to destroy Russia at the end of the day, despite the fact that most of the mainstream media has been telling you this, and Kaja Kallas being the prime example. And let me just not go into detail about that. So I believe that our objective is, well, I know for sure that our objective is to end the war as soon as possible. Also to save Ukraine, because the longer the war goes on, the more casualties they will have, and the harder it will be to rebuild the country after the fighting stops. And as you see it with the case of the younger age cohort between 18 and 25 or 22, which has been enabled to cross the borders a few weeks ago, and hundreds of thousands of them are already leaving Ukraine. The future of Ukraine is actually leaving Ukraine because they don't want to die in a war. I think there's a very convincing argument that to save Ukraine, you actually have to end the war so they will survive. And our belief is that President Trump is sharing the same view. He wants to end the war as soon as possible. Of course, it's not easy. There are many forces acting against him, one of them being the coalition of the willing, another of them being the government in Ukraine, which is clearly interested in fighting this war as long as possible. And I cannot blame them because they're defending their home country, their homeland. So this is what they're supposed to do, and we wish them all the best. But at the end of the day, I think everybody has to realize that there's no solution to the war on the battlefield, and you have to start to negotiate.
And there was a chance, even in Budapest, there was a plan for a summit in Budapest between President Putin and President Trump, and Trump decided to cancel it because I guess he didn't see any chance to get compromise from Putin's side, from the Kremlin. Can there be a real Budapest summit in the near future when Mr. President Trump can get guarantees from the Russian side that they are serious to get in this process of peace talks?
If there's one place in the West where this meeting can take place, that's in Budapest. We're the only country which is on talking terms with both of the major players, both the United States and Russia. All of the other European countries have forfeited this opportunity to be taken seriously by the Russians. And if you want to end the war, you eventually have to talk to the Russians because they're one of the parties in this war. So they're on the front line, and it matters what they think and it matters what they do. Of course, what we see is that this process takes time. It's a bit more complicated than President Trump has anticipated when he came to power, but we very much appreciate his efforts to have a conversation with Russia, to address the fundamental issues around the war, and also to bring this fight to a close as soon as possible. We see that the talks are ongoing. Of course, you have the special envoy of President Putin visiting the United States last week. Kirill Dmitriev has been there. Steve Witkoff is still in the process. The foreign ministries are in the process. Occasionally, the presidents talk as well. There are lots of hard and complicated details to be sorted out. And we wish President Trump could do miracles when it comes to ending wars, but occasionally it takes time. And we saw it in the Middle East as well, that it took quite a lot of time, even for a country which is so close to the United States as Israel is, to come to terms with the objectives of the US administration and also come to terms with the political reality on the ground, both when it comes to Israel and both when it comes to Gaza. And that was not an easy thing to do, but after like 7 months of negotiating and arm wrestling and anything else, there was a compromise which ended the active fighting in the Middle East. And of course, it flares up here and there, but then generally speaking, it's under control. And if President Trump could achieve something similar in Ukraine, I think that would be a great opportunity for Europe to, on the one hand, seriously start to think about that how we're going to coexist with both Russia and Ukraine at the same time, and also that how we're going to redefine our relationship with the United States.
But America sometimes solve the problems by force, like we saw the Iranian bombings, for example, in the Middle East, but you just explained that there could be a very good American role making peace. But what if in Ukraine case the US will follow the line and will use force because Trump decides that the window of making a good agreement between Ukraine and Russia is impossible, so maybe he uses a Tomahawk tool exporting to Ukraine and he chooses that to do it by force. What would the Hungarian peace narrative be in that case?
Well, our peace narrative is not dependent on any other country because it comes from a very deep conviction of this government that war is not a solution to anything. And our responsibility is to keep up the idea of peace, something that we have did from the first day of the war. And occasionally we were only together in that with the Vatican. Now we have President Trump on our side as well, which is a welcome development, if I can say. On the other hand, you see these ideas floating around here and there. This is part of the negotiating process that occasionally you have to higher the stakes to be able to compromise on those. And if I look at the Russian demands, I have the same impression, is that everybody starts from a maximalist position and they will find a middle ground somewhere in between. And where that middle ground will be is the subject of the talks which are still ongoing.
I see. Two last questions at the end, Marton. One of them is connecting to the connectivity, which is an official Hungarian strategic narrative these days, which means that Hungary seeks strategic cooperation with all the trading blocs, all the political blocs in the world, the big global players, China, Russia, America, South America, Pacific, the Eastern opening policy, for example. And this strategy, I'm quoting critics here, this strategy works when there is a peace, there is an intention on the side of America and China to make trade agreements like we saw the Xi Jinping and Trump meeting recently. But what if the trade war broke out? What if there will be a strategic arms race or geopolitical and maybe military games between the huge powers? So the negative scenario, what would Hungary do in this case? Because you are in the middle, you are a keystone state between West and East, and you, in a small country, in this case, get in trouble. Am I right?
I disagree, not with you, but with the assumption. And I disagree because there are so many countries out there, so many interests, so many businesses out there that you can always find a partner you can work with. Of course, you have some critical fields like critical minerals, which have been a source of contention between the EU and China recently, for example. But unfortunately, we're not in chip making as we speak. So it only affects us indirectly. Also, if you look at this anticipated new Cold War or great power games and everything else, that's going to be focused on the Pacific because that's where the center of the world economy is. Unfortunately for us, because as long as it was in Europe, we had much better chances of economic growth as well. And now we have to adapt to that situation. But I think diversification will remain key. And just to give you an example, a couple of weeks ago, it was announced that a major investment from Asia will be coming to Hungary, to Southeast Hungary, which eventually came from Singapore, which is part of the Eastern opening policy. But so far, the Eastern opening policy has been framed in a way that that's the official name of Hungary cozying up to China, which is true to some extent because we have very good political relations with China. But we also have very good economic relations with South Korea. We also have good cooperation with India, also with Japan, now with Singapore, and a bunch of other countries from the region, and this will continue. The Prime Minister recently been to Azerbaijan to the official summit of the Organization of the Turkic States, which is also another format that we use to ensure that our economic interests are met. And I remember back in the mid-2010s when this format came around and the Hungarian Prime Minister joined it as an observer, and Hungary is not a full member but an observer to the OTS, which was back then called the Turkic Council. Everybody was asking these strange questions that, okay, what about the history of the Hungarian people, and what about the relationship with the Finns and the Estonians, and this is Turanism coming back and all those other things. Fast forward 10 years, war in Ukraine starts. Ursula von der Leyen travels to Baku to meet President Aliyev, a very close partner of our government, forgetting about all the criticism that she had toward Azerbaijan before that because of economic interests. So at least we are being honest with our partners. We don't want to enforce our political views on anybody else. We don't want to tell them how they should live, how they should organize their country. We're here to conduct mutually beneficial relations with anybody who's interested in that. And I think as a small-sized open economy, as a keystone state you mentioned, this is the only rational thing to do, that you have to make everybody interested in your own success. And this is not impossible. Look at the example of the Middle East. You look at the example of Singapore, for example. With sound policies, you can become indispensable even to great powers.
I see. Marton, last question. It just came to my mind that Mr. Trump told, the mic was on, and Mr. Trump told Orbán Viktor in the last international meeting they met that he's interested in Orbán staying on power in Hungary, and there will be an election in next spring in Hungary. Will Mr. Orbán use this visit to the White House to strengthen his position to the Hungarian audience that he's a potent, very influential international player in the international political scene, and to garner this kind of attention to his policies before the election?
You know, even our progressive opponents have to concede that our Prime Minister is much more significant, an international player compared to all the others who are leading countries of similar sizes, which clearly shows his talent for understanding the world and also to shape it in a way which is in his interests. I think that this is a very important feature of statesmen still, that they must have a vision of where the country is going and also that how we're going to get there. And even the biggest critics of the Prime Minister concede that he has that vision. You may agree with that vision or you may not, but the vision is clearly there.
Thank you for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for the attention, dear viewers. We see each other next week. Bye-bye.